C'est la vie.
I am a peace process baby.
I should just make a song called I Love Europeans.
I always say, like, people in Northern Ireland have two faces.
Peace Babies, un documentaire audio de Café Babel. 4 portraits pour comprendre l'identité de la génération qui a grandi après les troubles en Irlande du Nord, en toute subjectivité. Épisode 4, Connor, raconté par Hélène.
Pour aborder la question de l'identité, on est allé voir du côté de la communauté protestante, puis catholique. On a parlé de leur enfance, marquée par la séparation. Mais il y a aussi d'autres sons de cloche, dont celui d'un rêveur révolutionnaire. Connor, rencontré dans un énième bar, nous décrira un Belfast uni dans la musique et un brin contestataire.
There has to be a space for young people, a space for us to say basically like, why do we have the peace process? You know, what's the point of having peace if we're not going to move forward as a culture, if we're not going to do something different?
Notre premier samedi soir à Belfast, Noé, l'ami breton de Morgane qui nous héberge sur place, nous emmène au National. C'est un pub du centre-ville, assez en vogue, où tous les expats se retrouvent pour boire des coups le vendredi soir. On arrive dans une cour intérieure chauffée, avec un bar en bois. Le plafond est orné de guirlandes de plantes et de petites lumières. En somme, un paradis à hipster. Si Noé nous amène ici, c'est qu'il connaît le groupe qui joue ce soir, et notamment Connor, le chanteur. Le temps de la pause arrive au bout de quelques chansons et il descend l'estrade pour rejoindre notre table. Connor fait environ 1m75. Il a des cheveux châtains, bouclés et des yeux très bleus. Il avait remarqué la lumière rouge de notre enregistreur allumée pendant qu'il chantait. Quand on lui explique qu'on s'intéresse à la question de l'identité chez les jeunes en Irlande du Nord, son débit de parole s'accélère. Il semble avoir un avis sur tout et ce qu'il raconte nous intrigue. Par exemple, il nous détaille ses batailles avec le gouvernement local pour qu'il finance de la nourriture végétarienne à la place des fast-foods. Ou encore, qu'ailleurs en Europe, il n'aurait jamais pu gagner assez avec sa musique. Bref, il a des choses à dire. Connor a 23 ans. Il est passionné par sa musique, qu'il utilise pour faire passer des messages politiques, et gagne sa vie en faisant du busking, c'est-à-dire en jouant dans la rue. À ses heures perdues, il lit énormément et explore tous les recoins de Belfast. Il passe son enfance dans la campagne nord-irlandaise, dans un village majoritairement catholique. Ceci étant dit, ni lui ni sa famille ne sont particulièrement pratiquants.
So in the town, in the small village that I'm from, I mean, there wasn't that many Protestant people that I hang around with. And there was a school for Protestant children, but it was really, really small and it was not a big population. And then when I was younger, I played Gaelic football. So that was mostly like Catholic people played Gaelic football. So it just kind of shapes in a non-forceful way who you're hanging around with.
Connor s'est installé à Belfast il y a environ 5 ans. Il est arrivé pour les études, mais ne semble pas avoir envie de partir de sitôt. On peut le comprendre. Belfast, à l'heure actuelle, n'a rien à envier à d'autres capitales européennes. Les bars et cafés côtoient une vie culturelle vibrante. Dans le quartier universitaire, on entend parler plusieurs langues et la vie s'éteint seulement tard dans la nuit. Pourtant, Belfast n'a pas toujours été comme ça.
I mean, the public space now is completely different from what it was in the past. I have met musicians that played in the past and said, to be honest, Belfast has kind of always been a place that you could make money if you were playing in the street. People have always loved and respected you playing in the street. But obviously, I think people were a lot more frightened to be out and to be finding trouble. I mean, you're going to come into contact with some sort of violence or some sort of police force. So I would say the whole city's been transformed by that. And Belfast, I mean, my parents are from Portadown. They just said Belfast was not the place that you wanted to go to. It wasn't the place that you wanted to be in for a long time. If you had to do something there, you went in and you got out and you left and you went home because something bad was going to happen, or there was a tension. I have one of my cousins even said like 10 years ago he wouldn't go out in Belfast because it wasn't that much after the Troubles, and not much of the city had been developed as a sort of cosmopolitan place or as a city. It was still a small town being rebuilt after all the violence. So now I think when I talk to taxi drivers all the time, when I talk to people on the street, they're just so, they think it's a completely different place, and I really love that, and I'm so happy that it's like that. And as a musician, for me, this is all about music.
Et la musique à Belfast, c'est une affaire sérieuse. En particulier la musique punk, qui même pendant les troubles créait un sentiment d'union au-delà du conflit. Un concert en particulier est même rentré dans l'histoire. En 77, le groupe punk The Clash doit se produire à Belfast, mais il annule sa venue à la dernière minute alors même que le public attend déjà. Les fans s'impatientent et retournent leur colère contre les forces de l'ordre. L'émeute qui suit marque les esprits à l'époque. En grande partie car c'est la seule, pendant les troubles, à voir des jeunes protestants et catholiques s'unir contre un ennemi commun.
If you go back to the 1980s in the Troubles, there's a movie made about it. It's called Good Vibrations, and it's a really good movie. And it's basically about how even during the Troubles and the worst parts in the 1980s and 90s, people had like a shared identity of loving music and loving punk music. And so people talk about it like they were punks in Belfast, and it didn't matter where you were from or which part of Belfast you were from. You were just there for one night to experience punk music and like lose yourself in the music. And that's really, really important. I think that's a really good thing to carry forward as we're moving forward as a country. So a lot of the work that should be going into Belfast now, and a lot of the work that I would like to be part of, is creating a new shared cultural identity.
Good Vibrations, c'est le nom d'un disquaire connu à Belfast, chez qui les gens se rejoignaient pour parler musique, peu importe leur orientation politique. Pour mieux comprendre l'esprit punk à Belfast, nous sommes allés farfouiller dans les archives de quotidiens anglophones. En 2016, le Irish Times publie un long article sur le sujet qui résume bien la philosophie musicale des 70s.
Plutôt que de rejoindre un club de l'association athlétique gaélique ou un groupe de flûte loyalistes, ou encore de s'inscrire dans les ailes de la jeunesse de l'IRA ou de l'UDA, les jeunes punks des deux camps ont essayé de donner un sens à leur vie en se concentrant sur la musique et la sous-culture des jeunes à laquelle ils appartenaient.
Connor, lui, épouse cette culture punk et ce qu'elle représente, mais tout en restant attaché à son héritage, en particulier la langue qu'il partage avec ses ancêtres du Sud.
Yes. For yes, you can say ta. You can say how are you? So I can ask you how are you? You can say Kujem or Tatu.
Connor a appris le gaélique irlandais pendant 3 ans au secondaire, mais il n'en garde que peu de souvenirs. D'après la manière dont il en parle, il semble associer le gaélique à une forme de résistance. Avant les troubles, différents gouvernements unionistes l'avaient repoussé pour imposer la pratique de l'anglais. Le gaélique irlandais ressurgit seulement dans les années 70, alors que des détenus républicains la pratiquent au sein des prisons. Du coup, pour les opposants à la couronne britannique, la langue devient une forme de libération d'un territoire géographique et linguistique occupé. Mais concrètement, peu de personnes parviennent à tenir une conversation en Irish en Irlande du Nord aujourd'hui.
It's just hard because not that many people speak Gaelic. For being in Ireland and it being the language of Ireland, it was kind of wiped out by the English colonial forces. So it's very hard to find. But if you go to the south, you go to Galway, you go to Cork, you can still find people that speak Irish. And my grandfather in Portadown, he used to teach Irish and Irish music. And this was during the Troubles, so it was a bit of a hard situation to be in. But I think he was very stubborn as a person, so he kept doing it. He doesn't care. But it's nice for that. I like that.
It was part of the resistance.
I think so, yeah. I think everybody who's Catholic was part of the resistance. Everybody and their brother was in the IRA, I think so.
It was filled with rain. Suddenly, you smile at me and really, here's the pain. Dark days of time, bright days a year. Sunny one, shine so sincere. Sunny one, so clear.
Peace Babies, un documentaire audio de Café Babel. Épisode 4, Connor. En 2016, la moyenne des problèmes de santé mentale du pays était de 25% plus élevée par rapport à l'Angleterre. Fait encore plus troublant, il y aurait eu plus de suicides entre la date de l'accord de paix et 2016 que de morts causées par les années de violence. Pour Connor, c'est le vide laissé par les troubles qui serait la cause de ce mal-être. Paradoxalement, la fin des violences aurait rimé avec absence de cause commune contre laquelle se battre.
Also, just the problem with young men as well. I mean, because I have to speak for a lot of men in Northern Ireland. Like the mental health in Northern Ireland is the worst in the UK by far. So I think this is a huge hangover from the Troubles, and this is a huge part of the problem in Northern Ireland. And I think there's a lot of people left behind because, whether it's a good or bad thing, I think it give a lot of men and women as well, but I think it's more to do with men, is it gives them like a mission in life. They have an identity, they have something to fight for. There's something there that's really tangible. And when the Troubles went away, I think a lot of this went away, and I think this is breaking down the communities. So
Deux groupes armés étaient particulièrement importants et actifs pendant les troubles. D'un côté, les catholiques nationalistes de l'IRA, et de l'autre, les protestants loyalistes de l'UVF. Et encore aujourd'hui, tous ne parviennent pas à renoncer au combat. Des communautés, notamment au sein des quartiers populaires, subissent encore la présence de paramilitaires dissidents qui, faute de mieux, se reconvertissent en gardiens de la communauté.
you can see in the areas that have held on to the past and have paramilitaries and have kind of the same kind of thing going on. It's just really bad for the people living there because the paramilitaries have no war to fight anymore. There's no main reason to have those kind of organizations, and now they're just trying to hold on to themselves using drugs and using money from drugs, and that's invading the community as well. And then Belfast is dealing with just more modern city problems like drugs. And you can kind of see in the bars, you can see like old people that are still in the IRA or the UVF, in the paramilitaries. The ones that are really stuck in the past, their skin is so red because they're alcoholics. Like, it's really terrible for their health, and they die young, and their health is just really bad.
Comme avec les autres, en parlant du passé, on a fini par refaire l'avenir. Et c'est à ce moment-là que le Brexit s'immisçait dans la conversation. Anna l'avait affronté en prenant des photos des vraies victimes du divorce, les habitants aux frontières, alors que Clio s'est agacée de tous ces gens qui n'auraient pas réfléchi avant de voter. Comme elle, Connor a un sentiment de frustration.
And it's really interesting because the government in the UK has taken away Erasmus funding for the students going to university in the UK, which is horrible. It's absolutely a terrible idea. So this is the start of the breakup between the United Kingdom and the European Union. And this is the start of the fracture between young people's identity and whatever is going on in the next 10 years.
Un monde sans Erasmus mais avec des frontières serait-elle l'angoisse de tous les millennials européens ? Par exemple, pour Connor, un monde comme ça, c'est flippant. Mais ce n'est pas forcément un sentiment partagé par tout le monde.
That there's a big tension between nationalism and globalism in the world today, especially in Europe, and we're starting to see the fracture of Europe and the European Union. I think Northern Ireland is a good place to look at because you have to look at why do people separate each other just based on identity, that if you ask more questions, they wouldn't be so important, And I said this before, if you ask people in Northern Ireland to name 6 major differences between Catholic and Protestant faith, I don't think they could do that. And they would, 20 years ago, they would kill each other for that. But I don't think nowadays they could actually do it and get deep into what it means to be different in that kind of sense. And I don't think people want to be seen as a country that's like against immigrants or against this type of thing. Belfast needs immigration. It needs people coming here. And the more people from the rest of Europe that come here, the less likely they are to talk about, or not to talk about, but they're less likely to be prejudiced against Catholics and Protestants or against the Troubles or have this kind of identity going on. So it only adds to the new identity going for Belfast and for Northern Ireland. I mean, Belfast should be like the beacon for Northern Ireland. It could change the rest of the country. and a lot of us want to see ourselves as more either European, or even if we're Irish, I don't want to see myself just as on an island separated from the rest of the world. I want to see myself as, yes, I have my cultural identity, but the reason why I enjoy being Irish is so that I can share it with other cultures.
Comme on l'a fait avec Anna et Clio, on a demandé à Connor « Where are you from ?» D'où viens-tu?
I try not to say I'm from Northern Ireland because a lot of people don't understand that there's Northern Ireland. They just think of Ireland, so...
Dans le prochain et dernier épisode, on vous parlera de Célina. C'est une Peace Baby un peu spéciale, puisque d'une part, elle se souvient du jour de l'accord de paix, et de l'autre, qu'elle est mi-libanaise, mi-nord-irlandaise. À suivre sur cafébabel.com.